In this video, we're going to look at the data exercise for the Interpret an Economic Data column, which relates transparency or corruption to economic performance. The purpose of this is to see whether or not the results that we found in the main article are robust when we consider an alternative sample of data. So in this spreadsheet here, we've got an alternative sample of 10 countries drawn randomly from the full sample of countries available. And in order to compare these results with the results from the original article, I've put the original article values in red here on the spreadsheet so that we can compare them. And the first thing I'm going to do is to calculate the average values of each series to see whether or not these are consistent with the original values. So first of all, as you see here, I've calculated the average value for the growth rate. Now I'm also going to calculate here the average values for the transparency or corruption index and GDP per capita. And if we look at these here, we see that the sample is a little bit different. First of all, the average value of growth is somewhat lower at 2.93 relative to 4.27 in the original paper. The value of the transparency index is somewhat higher, but the big difference comes with the GDP per capita series, which is almost twice as big as the original values. Now, whether or not this is going to make a difference to our results, well, we'll see as we make additional calculations. The next calculation we're going to make is to calculate the correlation coefficients for each of the series. So this is answer to question 2 here. So first of all, I'm going to calculate the correlation coefficient, which I use the Correl function in Excel, and I highlight the two series here, growth and the transparency index, and we get a value here of minus 6.9, and we see that while that's still strongly negative, it's a little bit lower than the original value that we got in the paper. So what I'm going to do now is do similar calculations for the correlation between growth and the level of GDP per capita. So I calculate that here, and again highlight the relevant series here. And if we do this, we find that again we get a negative correlation, not quite so high as for the original paper, but still reasonably strong negative correlation. Finally, we will calculate the correlation between the transparency index and GDP per capita. So again, I use the Correl command, highlight the relevant series here, and if we calculate that correlation coefficient, we again find in this case, a strong positive correlation, not quite so high as the original value, but still indicating that our results in the original paper are quite robust to the choice of country we include in our sample. It's also interesting to take a look at the Spearman rank correlation coefficient, again for the sake of checking whether or not our results are robust. So rather than do the calculations on the spreadsheet here, I've calculated them earlier, and highlighting them here, we see we get a very similar pattern. We get strong negative correlations between growth and the transparency index, and between growth and the level of GDP per capita, and a strong positive correlation between transparency and GDP per capita. So again, we always need to bear in mind that when we're calculating correlations, it's not the same thing as calculating causation.